I think as recruiters, we massively underestimate like how much it costs to win a customer. And we think that when we're doing it, it's free, but it's not. You're spending a huge amount of time to win every customer that you win. And so if you work that out by how much, maybe not how much you're paying yourself, but how much you should be paying yourself or how much you're paying your staff or whatever, actually the cost per customer is already really high.
That's true.
And some people aren't going to respond to outreach and some people are going to come in through different ways.
It was 6 months into running his business. Tom Froggatt was sitting alone in a small office with no windows, making cold calls to clients who didn't want to talk to him. After 3 days of silence, he realized something had to change.
I've never really looked at what other recruitment companies do very closely because I think the sector's starting to innovate over the last few years, but it's been slow to innovate, right? So I was always interested in what other industries were doing.
That moment became a turning point in a career that spanned 2 decades. Tom started out at S3, where he became a top biller and opened their New York office at just 25 years old.
Back when I started in recruitment, the problem that we were solving was actually access to talent, right? We didn't have LinkedIn. My team look at me like I'm absolutely crazy when I say that now. It's like, well, how did you do any recruitment?
Right.
But we had hundreds of thousands of pounds of advertising budget and we had a database with 1 million candidates. And, it wasn't so easy to find and contact people back then as it is now.
Absolutely. In 2017, he launched Singular, a biotech search firm that's grown into one of the leading specialists in Europe.
So I was really clear that by the time I left, I really wanted to build a business that was really genuinely specialist. There were a number of biotech recruitment companies, but very few of them focused on the very scientific, very technical early drug discovery part of the market. Partly because there was some misperceptions about the quality of the business and the value of the roles and things like that, but also just because it's so technical, so much more technical than anything I'd ever worked in, that it's just really complex. And so we really wanted to provide more support for that.
Welcome to the Resilient Recruiter Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Whitby. In this episode, Tom shares how he rebuilt his approach to business development, moving from cold outreach to a system built on content, paid campaigns, and data-driven processes that generate consistent client demand.
One of the biggest things was start a podcast. But what I found was what we did was we interviewed CEOs, CSOs, other executives in the biotech industry about their career. The whole premise was they were all scientists by training, but they were all doing different jobs. Talk to us about how you became a CEO or a chief scientific officer or whatever it might be. And that just got me in a room with people that I never would have got in front of.
Yeah. We also talk about how he turned a £200,000 loss into a launchpad for innovation, spinning out an AI company called Versapia, which helps organizations measure and build high-performance cultures.
And I think what a lot of people try and do, and this isn't just a recruitment thing, they try and reverse engineer the problem to the thing they want to sell.
Okay.
Rather than going, what are the actual problems these people are facing? And then how can we help to solve those problems? And you don't always have to change your product, although sometimes you do a little bit.
Interesting. If you have ever felt like the methods that worked for you in the past just aren't working as well anymore, this conversation will give you a new way to think about marketing, systems, and scale. Tom, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, great to be here, Mark. Thank you for having me.
You were referred to me by Don Zhu. How do you know Don?
Don was one of the first people I hired when I moved to New York and set up the New York business for Real Staffing. So I've known Don for, it must be nearly 15 years now.
Wow, she is awesome. And
yes.
So she's been on the show twice. I did an event in New York and met with her there. And then I did another event in Florida and she came along to that. And then she and Grace came on the show and we recorded in person in Tampa. Just an amazing, wonderful person. Really, really glad that I know her now.
She certainly is. And I remember interviewing her, and before she had any recruitment experience, I think she was the first person we hired out there, actually. And even then, we walked out of the interview and it was like obvious that this person was going to be brilliant at anything she did. So we were like, we got to make her an offer now before she goes somewhere else.
Fantastic. Yeah, awesome. So we'll link to the interviews with her in the show notes here. So, well, I always start by asking, how did you get into recruiting?
Yeah, well, I grew up wanting to be. No, I'm joking. No, it was really straightforward. I finished university and I was just really, really sick of having no money. And I was just trying to figure out where I could make the most money in the shortest amount of time possible. I'd not really done a very vocational degree. I did an English literature degree. But I also played rugby at university. And there was a couple of guys I'd played rugby with who were in the year above me who'd left previously, who had gone and worked in recruitment. And they seemed to really enjoy it. But most importantly, whenever I met them for a beer, they always seemed to have loads of cash. So that was really why I got into recruitment. And this is, back in the day when the base salaries were very, very low. I think my base salary was £17,000 living in London at the time.
That's hilarious. What year was this?
This was 2006.
Okay, so I started in 1997. My first base salary was $10,500.
Okay, you win.
I was really excited when I got a raise to $12,000, and then eventually 14 and 18 and 20. But yeah, 10.5K was hilarious.
Yeah. It's funny, isn't it? You see people complaining now that they're getting 50 grand as a starting salary, right. And it's just like, you guys don't know. But yeah, that was how. And I went and interviewed at a bunch of recruitment firms. Obviously, I was based in London at the time, so there's thousands of them, right? You've got a lot to choose from. And I went to a company called Real Staffing, which was part of S3, and was really impressed with the people that I met. But the thing that really impressed me was it was the only place where when I went back for my second interview, all the people I'd met at my first interview, as they walked past me, actually said hello and asked me how I was and sort of seemed to remember that I was there. And I was really lucky because I joined that company and I was there for 10 years, the first 10 years of my career. So I think that's pretty rare to find the right thing first off.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, that is awesome. So I'd love to learn about what you're doing now because you have two separate businesses, so I don't really know where to start. So you've got Singular, and then you have Versapia.
Yeah.
Okay, I want to make sure I'm saying it correctly.
Yeah.
So Singular is hiring solutions for biotech. Mm-hmm. Versapia is an AI company. Which do you think? Like, where should we start?
I think Singular is probably the most relevant one. And actually, Versapia was a spin out of Singular. I founded Singular 7 years ago now. Feels weird to say 7 years. It doesn't feel like that long. And we're a biotech search and talent company. So we work with primarily sort of smaller biotech companies from startups to a few hundred people is broadly where we operate. And we help them to hire very, very technical staff. So, very niche scientific talent. We offer broader talent acquisition services and things like that as well. The market in biotech really turned in 2022. And what we found at the time was that a lot of our clients weren't planning to grow. And it wasn't so much a commercial issue for us at the time because enough of them still were recruiting that it wasn't a problem. But we had this group of maybe 40% of our clients that I just couldn't do anything to help, and they were going through a difficult time, and I just didn't like that we couldn't do anything for them. And the year previous, we'd internally been through a big culture transformation in the company, and we'd sort of developed a bunch of tools and processes and things like that had really helped us to establish a high-performance culture. And what I noticed in our clients was that many of them, even though they couldn't grow, had to go further with the resources they had, so they needed to get more from their teams than they had done previously. And we started just applying some of the things that we'd done internally to our clients as kind of consulting services. And we built a full consulting practice around it and a whole methodology around how you build high performance culture that allowed us to go into any company really and say, this is where you are culturally, this is where you're trying to go, these are the next few steps, and this is how you execute them. But every company is different, and that required a lot of tailoring and customization, as you can imagine, which until kind of this year meant that it had to be consultant-led and it was quite expensive to deliver. And so we had to charge a lot of money for it. So what we were finding was we spoke to a lot of companies who wanted to do something about their culture, but they just couldn't afford to spend 100 grand or 200 grand on a consulting project. So earlier this year, we were looking at, what if we used all of our IP from that consulting business and trained an LLM with it, and then found ways to get the right input into that system? What would the output be like? And it turns out it was pretty good. And so we decided we were going to spin out our culture consulting business into Versapia, and transform that into an AI-driven software company, which is what we're building now. So we did that in May, and we're very, very early in that journey. But we've got a prototype, we've got it in beta testing, we're raising some money for it. It's really exciting. What the second order effect of that I think has been really pleasing, and this will probably be interesting for your listeners, is that because we'd been diversifying our service offering at Singular, that was kind of what we needed to do in a difficult market. But we were also finding that the market was kind of getting confused about what we did. And so, I had a call from someone I'd known for 10 years. And he said, "Hey, do you still do that recruitment stuff?" And I thought, yeah, it's 90% of our business. But yeah, we still do that recruitment stuff. That was a signal to me that actually there's quite a lot of confusion about what we do. Since we spun out Versapia and really refocused Singular on just search and talent, the traction that the team have got has been phenomenal. So the market's clearer on where we are. The team are clearer on what they're supposed to be selling. So that's been a really pleasing sort of consequence of this change as well.
All right. Interesting. There's a lot to dig into there. I guess let's start then. Tell me the growth journey of Singular over the 7 years then, and what's worked and where have things got stuck?
Back in 2019 was when we started the business, or when I started the business. I say we because you get used to saying we, right? But it was just me in a room with no windows, which was interesting.
Why a room with no windows? What was going on?
It was cheaper. It was cheaper, Mark, if you had no windows.
Hilarious. So is this a serviced office or?
Yeah, just a serviced office down the street. I'm not very good at working from home even now. So I'm in the office today. There's nobody here, but I'm in the office because I don't like working from home. I started out with a really clear picture of what I wanted the business to be, and a lot of that survived to today. I'd always had this kind of entrepreneurial bug. I actually think kind of S3 are really good at fostering that in people. Yes. And they gave me a huge opportunity to, when I set up the New York business, I was 25 and I had 3.5 years experience. And I remember the guy who was running...
what an opportunity, right? 25. Yeah. And you're like, hey, do you want to set up our New York office?
100%. And the guy who was running Switzerland was 26. The guy who was running the Singapore office was 25 as well. So they were just great at giving people opportunities. But it instills that thing in you, right? That, actually, I can build this from scratch, which is a big confidence thing. And I went to another company, a smaller company that was also life sciences recruitment after 10 years at S3. And they were a really good business. They'd taken a lot of their best performers out to the US. And I was back in London at this point. And essentially what had happened in London was that they had a bunch of people who were very good. They were quite inexperienced, and they were lacking a bit of structure and a bit of process and a bit of leadership. I think all 24 of them were reporting directly to the CEO when I arrived, actually, which he had other things on his plate. And over 2 years with them, I kind of re-engineered the whole business and, hired a bunch of people, let people go, moved people around. And through that process, just realized that actually I could have done this for myself, and I actually had the knowledge to do it for myself. Which, when you've been part of a big company for a long time, you're not always sure that actually it's you, not the company.
Right. How much, without the S3, brand and the back office and the marketing department and the ops team and all that, because it is a different thing. You're like, oh yeah, doing it yourself. Now you have to figure out a way to do all of those things, and it's all on you.
Yeah, 100%. And, the interesting thing was when I didn't think of this before I started, but after I started Singular, the thing I missed the most was actually having a manager.
That's interesting. That's the thing. You think most people start a business because they don't want a manager anymore. They want to be their own boss, make their own decisions, have autonomy, and so on.
Yeah, that's right. And I was the same. The thing that you don't tend to think about is that then all the decisions are your decisions, and you don't ever know if you're right or not.
Right.
Until afterwards, right?
Yeah, and so it's like a constant state of uncertainty and is this the right thing? I don't know. I think so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, exactly. And that I don't think that ever goes away, right?
Yeah.
It's still there. But yeah, so I was really clear that by the time I left, I really wanted to build a business that was really genuinely specialist. So I'd noticed that there were a number of biotech recruitment companies, but very few of them focused on the very scientific, very technical early drug discovery part of the market. Partly because there was some misperceptions about the quality of the business and the value of the roles and things like that, but also just because it's so technical, so much more technical than anything I'd ever worked in, that it's just really complex. And so we really wanted to provide more support for that. I also had this theory that the problem that companies were trying to solve when they were recruiting had changed. So, it'll have been the same for you in your career. Back when I started in recruitment, the problem that we were solving was actually access to talent, right? We didn't have LinkedIn. My team look at me like I'm absolutely crazy when I say that now. It's like, well, how did you do any recruitment?
Right.
But we had hundreds of thousands of pounds of advertising budget, and we had a database with 1 million candidates. And, it wasn't so easy to find and contact people back then as it is now.
Absolutely. You had to call people at work. They didn't even have mobile phones, right? So you had to call them in the office and go, hi, Tom, Mark Whitby. I'm an executive recruiter. Can you speak freely at the moment? Or can you at least listen? And they'd be like, I can listen. And then you're like, give me your cell phone number so I can call you after. It was that kind of thing, right?
100%. Actual headhunting, right? But, I think by the time I started Singular 2019, a lot of companies were still operating as if that was the problem they were trying to solve. And a lot of agencies were operating on that model still. I think it started to change. But my view was that actually that problem had been solved largely. Some people are still hard to find. And actually the problem now is an attention problem. And because it was easier to find and contact people, everyone got found and contacted more. So actually what you were trying to do was stand out in all that noise.
Yeah, true.
So from the very beginning, we were really big on brand, very big on sort of how do you craft that outreach message so it gets really high response? How do you get real high relevance in the candidates that you're targeting? Because that I found was the biggest variable in what the response rate was how relevant the role was to the candidate. And then, I wanted to build something that was very client-centric. I think a lot of people, when they start, they want to be boutique and they want to be very small and hands-on and crafted and things like that. I didn't want that. I wanted to build a big business, and I still do. But I wanted it to be client-focused. And the observation that I kind of made on that was that if you look at any other industry, people start companies because there is a problem that's not being solved, or they've found a better way to solve a problem, or there's some sort of angle that they have that they think is going to improve things for a group of people that they're going to serve. But a lot of recruitment companies, the problem that they're starting to solve is that the directors want a bigger cut of the commission.
Right. It's there's a lot of Me Too businesses.
Yeah. So I just wanted to really dive into what are the actual problems that clients are facing and how can we provide a brilliant service that they can't get anywhere else, and how can we really solve that? And I think that's been a guiding principle for us throughout. Like, I've never really looked at what other recruitment companies do very closely, because I think the sector's starting to innovate over the last few years, but it's been slow to innovate, right? So I was always interested in what other industries were doing. But having said that, the business model was pretty traditional at the start. It was a contingency recruitment business, all perm. My kind of methods of business development were cold calling and sending good CVs and like all the usual stuff, right? But there was a moment about 6 months in, and I think it must have been half term or something, because I'd been sat in this office with no windows, right? And it was starting to smell a bit by that point as well, 6 months in.
Windows are a good thing for many reasons. So whenever we're delivering a training event of any kind, it's like I require there to be natural daylight, especially if it's like a 1 or 2 day event all day. I don't think you can perform at your best if there's no natural light coming in, just the fluorescent lights. So maybe that's just me. I don't know. If you've ever wanted to reach out to a client or a candidate but couldn't find their email address or phone number, listen up. Recruiter Flow is an AI-first ATS and CRM with built-in data enrichment. You're on someone's LinkedIn profile, and with their Chrome extension, you can instantly find their email address and phone number. No switching between tools, no paying for multiple data providers. Plus, you can set up email aliases to protect your primary domain when you're doing outreach, something every recruiter should be thinking about for email deliverability. And here's the best part. It's all included in the platform. No add-ons, no surprises, just integrated tools that help you work faster and smarter. To see it in action, book a demo at recruitmentcoach.com/recruiterflow.
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I was purely looking at it from, well, this office is £100 a month cheaper though. So.
Fair enough.
But I remember this day, and it'd been 3 days in a row I'd been cold calling people. I had no jobs. In fact, no, if it was 6 months in, I would have done a few deals by that point. But at that time, I didn't have any jobs on. And I'd made 200 calls a day for 3 days in a row. Nobody was picking up. And the people who were picking up just didn't want to talk to me. And I remember thinking to myself, like, I've been doing this for 15 years. I really don't want to spend my time trying to talk to people who don't want to talk to me. But that was all I knew. And then it kind of struck me that, like, I'd bought all this stuff for the business, like, web services and the CRM and, lots of things, right? Insurance. And I hadn't had a cold call about any of them, but I'd still found a way to transact on them, right? And so I figured, all right, well, there must be a different way to do this, which was fine, but I didn't really know what that different way was. So I didn't do much of anything for a few weeks. I didn't really know what to do. And then eventually sort of got to the point where I thought, okay, well, referrals, yes. Targeted outreach, yes. But we need to really get into content and how do you attract people to you and inbound inquiries and
100%.
All this kind of stuff.
Yeah. When was this, Tom, that you had this?
Yeah, mid 2019.
Okay. Got it.
Yeah. So did several things. One of the biggest things was start a podcast.
There you go.
So Careers in Discovery started back then. We've been running that podcast for 6.5 years now. We've had 300 odd episodes. But what I found was what we did was we interviewed CEOs, CSOs, other executives in the biotech industry about their career. And the whole premise was they were all scientists by training, but they were all doing different jobs. Talk to us about how you became a CEO or a chief scientific officer or whatever it might be. And that just got me in a room with people that I never would have got in front of.
Yeah.
And there was a point at which it's not quite as strong as this anymore because we've got different methods, but there was a point at which a third of our clients had started out as being guests on the podcast, was their first interaction with us.
Yes.
And so that was the first key distinction that I made. And that's been a useful thing to keep in mind because, I mean, as you know, and as a lot of the listeners will know, all that traditional stuff doesn't work anymore. It certainly doesn't work to the same extent.
Right. I want to challenge that, Tom, in the following way. I think it's a combination. Hear me out here, because we teach both. So we've helped a lot of clients launch a podcast. We want them posting original content on LinkedIn, doing videos on LinkedIn, hosting events for like roundtables for their industry, really creating value for their ecosystem and positioning themselves as a leader and an expert, right? Not just another recruiter. And I stand by that. 100% believe that is the way to build your brand and generate inbound business, which is always a different conversation. If someone contacts you because they're like, "Hey, Tom, I've listened to your podcast for 2 years and now we're looking to build a team. Can you help?" Already they're pre-sold on working with you specifically, right? So that's an amazing thing. But at the same time, you alluded to this earlier, like the quantity of outreach has gone up in terms of LinkedIn messages, in-mails, emails, and that kind of stuff. And so I do think there's a place for a telephone call. Like what we're seeing with our clients is that if they're running an automated campaign, an email campaign, a LinkedIn automation campaign or whatever, then and they're publishing content, then that is all great and that gets you so far. But sometimes just picking up the phone converts the person who's in your sequence to, so I'm not talking about random cold calls to people right out of the blue, but as part of your outreach, the phone calls, I think, give you a higher overall response rate.
I think that's fair, actually. I think I'm more thinking about the kind of spec CVs and cold email on its own and that kind of stuff. I think you're right. No one really makes that many cold calls anymore, and the ones that you get are pretty poor, right?
Exactly. I think that's why it can still work. It's harder to get people to pick up. That's the biggest challenge.
That's true.
Right. But if you get them to pick up, then we've had clients tell us, like they make a cold call and the person on the other end goes, wow, nobody calls me anymore. So it kind of gives them an edge.
Yeah, 100%. No, I definitely, I think if I was to look at the suite of what I would think of as traditional techniques, that's probably the one that if I was pushed, I'd keep in there. I'm a bit scarred by spending those weeks with no one answering and what have you. But maybe I've become a bit lazy in my old age.
We went off on a tangent, but I want to bring you back to, you've been, smashing out cold calls for 3 days straight, no jobs on, and you had this realization, wait a sec, other industries don't do this in order to, there must be other ways of getting business. So you then launched the podcast and that set you on a different trajectory. How did that evolve for you? And what was the impact of that new direction?
Yeah, well, I think I started to get much more back from, and this is back in 2019 when there weren't as many podcasts around as well. I think it still works really well, but it definitely worked well then.
Absolutely. We started in the same year, by the way.
Okay.
So we started in November, December 2019. Yeah. So coming up for 6 years ago.
Yeah. So you'll remember, I think 1 in 5 people used to get back to me and say, yeah, I'll be on the podcast, which was crazy.
Really high response rate compared to a normal, have you gotten any jobs, or, here's a profile of a candidate that could be good for you guys, or.
Yeah. And I remember the moment where I really knew it was working was I went to see this guy. First of all, it was a brilliant podcast episode. He was a really interesting guy, had been a professional footballer, realized he wasn't going to be a Premiership footballer, went back and got his PhD in genetics, and then became a biotech CEO. Super interesting story. But at the beginning of the meeting, he was quite high profile, this guy. He'd been CEO of a company that had floated previously and, was very well connected in the industry. So getting him on was a big coup. And it was one of those where often I'd speak to the person before I met them for the podcast. And back then we were still doing them in person. This was pre-COVID. But I hadn't with this guy. I'd spoken to his assistant. I'd spoken to his communications team. What it's like when you get high profile people on there. It's the first time I'd met him. So he comes into the room and he said, while we're setting up, just tell me a bit about what you guys do. Yeah, I know you're not like a professional podcast host, so tell me a bit about what you do. And I told him, and he just said, have you spoken to our HR team? Because we're recruiting quite a lot at the moment. And I said, no. And he said, okay, I'll introduce you after this. We did the podcast and had a really good chat. And then he walked me down the corridor and introduced me to his HR team, and they became a client almost immediately.
Wow, that's awesome. And so, Tom, let's just double click on this for a second, if I may, because I think that can happen. Like you get through just having a podcast and having these really good, meaningful conversations with senior leaders in your space. So think about this for a second for those listening. How long is a typical cold call? It's 3 minutes if you're lucky, 5 minutes if you're really on fire, right? And it's versus having a 30 to 60 minute conversation with someone that is really going to accelerate the relationship. And as a byproduct of that, you've got trust, you've got rapport, they see you as someone who is substantial and not just another recruiter. And sometimes, literally, like you just described, Tom, the business will just like, hey, by the way, can you help us to recruit? But that doesn't always happen. And so what we find with our clients is sometimes they start getting discouraged because, let's say they do a podcast and then they're putting this great content out there and it hasn't immediately translated into a business win. And they're like, I don't think this is working. So we always encourage them to stay the course because there's so many people who start a podcast and then it just fizzles out. And where the real impact and reward is obviously, like anything, is through being persistent and like committing to it and keeping going, because it's like compound interest in the bank, right? It starts off slow, but like there's a really long tail on podcasts. People reach out to us and they listen to an interview I did like 3 or more years ago that's still out there that leads back to us, right? And so you really can't underestimate the long-term impact of and the opportunities that can come to you that you would have never gotten if you hadn't been putting yourself out there and delivering this value into the world. So I kind of I'm a bit evangelical about it, Tom, as you can hear. But what I'm curious about, you said 30% at one point of your business was coming from this source. So what is your strategy for converting those initial podcast conversations into relationships?
Well, at the beginning, it was very much just I would do the podcast and then I would say to them at the end, oh, by the way, if you want to talk about recruitment, if you want to talk about talent at any point, let me know. That's what we do. And some of them would go, yeah, actually, we are recruiting, or you should speak to this person, or you should do that. But no, you're absolutely right. I think some of them came later on, and it was just a case of keeping in touch with those people and continuing to try and find ways to provide value. So podcasting, was kind of maybe the first step into this whole world of creating content, creating things that were useful for people. We've done dozens of ebooks over the years. We've done webinars, we've done events, we've done, we've done scorecards, we've done huge amounts of different things that were all designed to just try and solve particular problems for our clients. For example, one of the most successful pieces of content that we did was, I remember when the lockdown was announced during the COVID pandemic. I vividly remember this. I'd been in the office. Not many people were in the office because people knew there was this thing going around. But I was like, it's like the flu. It'll be over in 3 weeks, right?
Yeah.
I was obviously wrong on that prediction. But I remember pulling up outside my house and I had the radio on in the car. And I never listened to the radio, so I don't know why I had the radio on. But they announced, it was about 5 o'clock in the evening, they announced the lockdown. And I didn't know what I was going to do because the first thought I had was like, how's anyone going to interview? Like, what's going to happen to the jobs we have? How long is this going to last? Like, no, didn't know what to do. And I remember panicking quite a lot. And then at some point I went, okay, you've got 2 hours to panic and then you have to do something about it. And as the 2 hours came to an end, I thought, okay, well, what are people going to want to know tomorrow? And so I stayed up until about 2 o'clock in the morning writing like a guide to remote interviewing, or a guide to remote hiring. And I thought, people are going to do this. Like, I'm not going to be the only one that does this, but I want to get it out first to our clients and our prospects and all this kind of thing. And that was one of the best pieces of content we did. And it wasn't anything.
That's a quick pivot, Tom, like straight into content that can help our clients. That was a stroke of genius.
Well, I think
/ desperation.
Desperation, perhaps. Yeah. I think I've always tried to look at it from the angle of what do people need? Like, what do our clients need help with, or what can we give them that would be useful? With the sort of concept that if you're useful enough, some of that will come back to you. And if you genuinely come at it from a point of view of helping people, and there's a brand element to this as well. I'm a big believer in brand. If you're watching this on video, you can see the graffiti behind me. This is our tagline, building brilliant biotechs. But, one of the upshots of podcasting was that we got associated with these sort of high-level people in the industry, It was one of the most interesting things that I was doing as well. And we were providing a service to people by giving them insight that they didn't have about how to progress their career in the industry. So we've always been very focused on that. And I think that's led us down some interesting paths in terms of what we've been able to provide and the clients we've been able to win. We had very recently, actually, a client come to us. We'd created an ebook, really, really specific ebook. So essentially, it was for mid-sized European biotech companies that wanted to hire the very best talent from big pharma companies, but was struggling to do so. We called it Raiding the Temple. I was quite pleased with that title. And it was just a 5-step thing. It's like, these are the problems. These are 5 things you can do to affect it. It was a good piece of content, but super niche. And we ran a bunch of adverts and outreach campaigns and all that kind of thing against it. And there was a case study at the back. And we didn't get a huge amount from it, but we got one client get in touch with us and say, the head of talent acquisition got in touch, said, my CEO read this. We'd really like to talk to you. And I'd not really heard of this company. I'd kind of heard of them, but didn't know much about them. And I looked into it. Bear in mind, our average client size is about 150 people. This was a 19,000 person company, and the head of talent acquisition and the CEO had read this piece of content. And we're just in the process of signing terms with them now, actually, to go and work with them. So we've just found that looking for where are those pain points that we can actually provide some value to has been a really powerful way to do business. And I don't think we ever would have won that client because they've got a PSL, they've got, hundreds of suppliers, all this kind of stuff, but they really wanted to work with us. No negotiation on rates. Everything we do is retained. They didn't push back on that.
Absolutely. It's brilliant, Tom. So I have to ask because, so do you have a dedicated marketing person or department or how? Because this is the biggest pushback I get is like, I'm not a marketer, I'm a recruiter, right? And you're asking me to suddenly, like, I know how to recruit and I know how to, do traditional business development. You're asking me to start putting content on LinkedIn and starting webinars and lead magnets and ebooks, and like people kind of freak out a little bit. So how much of that, like, do you use an agency? Do you have an in-house team, or is it really just Tom Froggatt, who's the marketing mastermind?
It was for a while. For the last year, we've had a marketing manager. But this is someone actually who was very new to marketing. She actually joined us as an EA. And I quickly realized that I was being a bit arrogant and I didn't have enough work for a full-time EA. But she was very good at copywriting and things like that and quite creative. And so we decided that she was going to be our new marketing manager. It's been a topic that I've kind of studied for the last probably 5 years and been really interested in myself. So I've just taught myself marketing. It's cost me a lot of money in failed campaigns. And
same here. My education has been similar. Did you say you did English? An English
yes.
degree? So
yeah.
I was philosophy. So same deal. So I've read all the books on marketing, copywriting, advertising, and paid lots for coaches, consultants, training, and everything else. But it's more of a passion. I've been self-taught as well.
Yeah, but I think there's a mentality shift as well, though, that needs to happen in that. My argument to the people who are saying that back to you would be, you are a recruiter, but if you've started your own business, you're not just a recruiter anymore. Your job is now to make your business successful.
Yeah.
And so you need to do whatever that means in your context. And that could be through cold calling and cold emails and things like that. That's fine. But if that's not working, you've got to find another way.
Exactly.
And one of the really interesting things over the last few months, so I've been starting this tech company, and I don't know how to run a tech company. That's what my wife told me anyway. I said, it'll be fine. I'll figure it out. But, I've been trying to immerse myself in that world as much as possible and meet people and learn as much about running that kind of business as I can. And there are a lot of things that are just business principles that transfer. But one of the things that's really struck me is we as recruiters, certainly I and the people that I kind of grew up with, were always trained to go and win business. You go and chase business, you win it, you secure it, you sign the client. It's all very like active verbs. And I think there's a real place for that, by the way. And I think we've actually, in a lot of businesses, lost the art of sales. And I think it's still a really powerful thing. And one of our key tenets at Singular is that we're a world-class sales organization. However, what's been really interesting learning about the technology ecosystem is that they don't look at it like that. They create systems and processes that consistently generate revenue. That's how they build their businesses. And that's a very different mentality. And that's now some of what we've transferred to Singular and tried to imbue it with the sales elements that we were already very good at. And as soon as you start thinking about it like that, then your actual path to generating that revenue and winning those customers and doing all that kind of stuff becomes very different.
Okay, this is super interesting. And I agree 100%, by the way. I think, like, if you look at any big business, whether it's in tech or otherwise, then they have built scale through systems and processes, right? Whereas a lot of recruitment businesses, especially SMEs, are very like up and down because it's reliant on, as you say, the individual effort of the owner and or a few salespeople to proactively go out and constantly win new clients. But then, when that doesn't happen, then you get this trough in the billings. That's not, you can't run a sustainable, scalable business like that, right? That's just crazy.
No.
Apart from being super stressful, it's like that just doesn't make sense. So can you give an example of how you've taken that system thinking and applied it in recruitment?
Yeah, some of it's about really understanding the mechanics of how do you attract people? How do you then build a value ladder? How do you progress people through working with you, get them to make small commitments, then offer them something bigger and that kind of stuff. So some of it's been around that. So for an example on that, I used to, as I'm sure a lot of people that you speak to do, I used to think, yeah, but advertising on LinkedIn, for example, it doesn't really work for recruitment. It doesn't really work for us. Until I started reading a lot of Alex Hormozi's stuff and looked at some of the figures he had in there about like conversion rates of his campaigns and all this kind of stuff.
And lifetime customer value.
Yeah, exactly. And it started to occur to me that it's not that advertising doesn't work. Like, I don't know if advertising works because I've never spent enough money on it. And he had an example in one of his books where the campaign had been like $10,000 worth of advertising and they generated like 35 leads and that had generated 5 customers or something like that. And this was relatively low ticket stuff. I think this was from his gym businesses. So I thought, okay, $10,000 to generate 5 customers. But then he had all the stuff about how you do that profitably. And I started looking at, well, what are our customers actually worth to us? And they're worth a lot. And I'd suggest it's probably the same for most recruitment companies, especially if they have high levels of client retention and repeat business and that kind of thing. When I looked at it, each customer in a 12-month period was worth about 55 grand to us revenue. And then if you work that out in terms of GP, it's probably like 30 to 35 in a 12-month period, not lifetime, just 12 months. And that sort of got me thinking, all right, well, actually, if it cost 10 grand to win that customer, or even technically 20 grand, you're probably a bit close to the bone there, but that's actually a pretty good deal. And I spoke to a guy, I had an advisory board that I put together. There's a guy on this advisory board who had run a huge service company in the pharma sector where they were running clinical trials for major pharma companies. He was winning $500 million deals from Pfizer and this kind of stuff. And I talked to him about this plan I had about how we were going to work this out through content and that I could afford to spend $4 grand and it'd generate this and da-da-da. He said, well, you've got to test this, but if £4,000 is going to generate you a client and that client is going to give you 30 grand in revenue in the first year, how many lots of £4,000 can you get your hands on and how quickly can you get them and just put them all into that machine?
That's a great ROI, right?
Yeah.
In fact, I think the acronym is ROAS, return on ad spend,
That's
ROAS, right? And so $4 grand to make 30, you're going to do that all day long.
Yeah. And I think as recruiters, we massively underestimate like how much it costs to win a customer. And we think that when we're doing it, it's free, but it's not. you're spending a huge amount of time to win every customer that you win. And so if you work that out by how much, maybe not how much you're paying yourself, but how much you should be paying yourself, or how much you're paying your staff or whatever, actually the cost per customer is already really high.
That's true.
And some people aren't going to respond to outreach, and some people are going to come in through different ways. So actually understanding that in other businesses that are bringing the sort of revenue in that you're bringing per client, they're spending 10, 20, 30 grand to win a single client. Then you suddenly realize, actually, I'm not even competing on the same field as these people. I need to rethink how I'm winning business. And so that was a big mindset shift, I think, that helped.
Yeah. And not only that, but so a lot of what we teach is organic like content, which is posting on social platforms like LinkedIn. And you can get good traction with that in terms of at least building your brand, being visible, building a following, getting a few inbound leads. But it's more about recognition so that when you do reach out to someone, they're more receptive. That's like the big play there. But it takes a long time. These platforms are designed, if you want real reach, you pay for it, right? They give you little, like 1,000 views, 5,000 views, like give you enough to kind of keep you hooked because they want content creators on their platform, right?
Yeah.
And so they need to give you some incentive and feedback that this is working, that your people are liking it. But the real reach is you pay to get that reach. And so if you can adopt this mindset and realize we're not just putting money, I mean, as long as you're testing and being intelligent with it, of course, but you need to figure out how to get an ROI here. But then if you scale that, your reach is much faster, right? And people are going to because when you post something on LinkedIn, some people are going to see it, some people are not going to see it, right? It's a bit hit or miss. But if you want to make sure that your target audience is seeing your ads in their newsfeed on a regular basis, you can achieve that. But you just need to invest.
100%. And you've got to learn how to do it properly and all that kind of thing. And I think organic is super important. And it's super important from a branding point of view, as you talked about. The business that you actually get from organic, although it's not very much, is going to be really high intent. And also, it's a bit unpredictable.
It is.
But it does generate revenue if you do it consistently and you do enough of it and you don't lose heart and you know what you're doing. But it's also a great place to test what you then use in your advertising, right? And LinkedIn recently, I don't know if you've seen this, you can now sponsor personal posts on LinkedIn.
I saw that. I need to figure this out because I've started seeing those in my newsfeed going, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, cost per click is way lower. So it's a way more effective, cost-effective way to advertise. But obviously, when you do proper ads, you're targeting a direct conversion, whereas with the sponsored posts you have to sort of less directly sell. So I think there's maybe less intent and things like that. But if you boost it, then or you supplement it with paid advertising, then it'll make a big difference. And I think it's about having a suite of ways in which you can win clients, right? It's you want to really double down on referrals. So, for example, we launched this program last year where, because we'd worked out how much clients were worth to us, I was like, all right, well, let's give someone $5,000 if they refer us a new client.
Yeah. Why not?
$5,000 worth of credit, right? And that's worked pretty well. It's not been huge amounts of clients, but we've won some from it. And it encourages them to spend a bit more money with you because they're getting $5,000 worth of stuff for free. And, I think in my previous mentality, I would have thought, I'm not giving them $5,000. That's ridiculous. But then you do organic content, you do advertising, you do outreach, you put all these things together, you do podcasting, and you don't have to do all this stuff at once, but you just build the sort of legs of
building
the table,
the machine.
Right?
That's the thing is as you say, it's just, if you can systemize it and you get it up and running, there's a process behind it. Like the podcast, we have an 80+ step process for planning, producing, and promoting every episode of the podcast. And there's different people doing different parts of that. But it's just a machine that just keeps going now. Can you give me an example of like when you're using LinkedIn ads, for example, what's the funnel look like? What is it that you're offering? Because a lot of people don't understand, like they think they're directly selling their recruitment service in an ad, which that's very hard to do. You have to make the immediate thing that someone is accessing much more specific and a smaller step in the journey.
Yeah, so I completely agree. And this is part of why the ads don't work kind of philosophy comes up, right? But you need to create that journey for people. So we would almost always, in fact, I would go as far as to say always now, advertise something free. Whether it's an event or a piece of content, or we have this thing called the Hiring Edge that we do where it's kind of like an insight session, but a really tailored insight session for a client. So if they've got hiring plans, we'll give them like it's $2,500 worth of data specific to what they're hiring for free. We don't charge them anything for it. And it's in a nice report and it's really useful. And we present it back to them and all that kind of stuff. They are under no obligation to use us or use it, or there's no expectation from us. But, you know, at the end of them doing that, they come and tell us what they're looking for. So we have the opportunity to qualify. We go away and do a bunch of work to pull the insights together. We present the insights back to them. And then we're able to say, by the way, if you want us to help you with this is how it would work. And we have a really high conversion rate.
Wow, that's interesting. That sounds like a Hormozy-inspired offer right there. But,
yeah, exactly. That was what it all came from, was we were just looking at, well, let's make this really obvious to people. And what's been great is since we've been running that offer, we've had less meetings actually. But the conversion rate has been significantly higher because we're now only having meetings with people who are at least thinking about hiring. Because they're not going to come and do that if they're not. There's no point. So while we're having less meetings, the throughput of that is huge. So yeah, you've got to advertise something that's easy for people to say yes to, and probably if you can, you want it to be free, so that they can get a bit of a sense of what you can do. But then you've got to have the rest of your, as you talked about, your 80 steps. You've got to know where you're going to take them from there. Otherwise, it's just going to all get a bit messy and you're going to be spending money on something that's not going to convert. And it takes a while to put that stuff in place.
For sure. So is that the direct offer in the ad is the discovery sort of insight process, or is there a step before that, like a white paper or...
Well, we have done it through content as well. So we've put content in the front of it. We're running both of them. In fact, no, I don't think we're running both of them at the moment. We have run both of them in parallel in the past. But yeah, it's sort of, you know, we've identified the pain points that solves. So it's, you know, it's time saving. It's not interviewing the wrong candidates. It's not getting your budget wrong. It's making sure people accept the offers at the end of the process, like a whole bunch of different stuff. And we'll run ads against those pain points. Then it advertises, come and get your Hiring Edge for free. You go to a landing page, it tells you all the stuff you're going to get and the value of it and how much it costs, which is nothing, and all that kind of stuff. And then they just book in.
Okay, Tom, this is fucking genius. Let me tell you, because here's the thing. Every recruiter wants more client meetings, right? And I'm like, okay, that's fine. And they're pitching in a cold email. They're saying, you know, can we have a 15-minute coffee meet intro, or would it make sense to put a time, into the calendar or whatever, right? Rubbish. It's rarely going to work. I'm like, what is the value? Why should they meet you? What 100%. Are they going to get out of it? And they're like, I don't really know. Like, well, market insight. I'm like, okay, well, that's good. Like, specifically what? Well, I mean, I'm interviewing these people all day long. I know what the trends are. I know, what the salary expectations are. I know what their competitors are doing, the right and wrong. I know I can guide them about, like, so once I get on a roll, they start thinking about, like, I can advise them on even the role itself. Are they recruiting for the right thing? I can give them help with the job description. I can, and they start unpacking all these things. I'm like, awesome. So do you tell them any of that stuff? And they're like, well, not really. Like, so they don't perceive any value in meeting you, they just see that's going to take time and I'm busy, right? And so what you've done is you have turned that initial discovery call into a real value and laid out the benefit to them of why they would spend that time with you and what they're going to get out of it. And you've made it a lot more tangible.
Yeah, I mean, to the point where we've put like pound values to each thing. Like, the market map is worth this much.
And it is actually that's a real tangible takeaway that is you could charge for. So I think that's the other thing is like where you've leveled up. You've not just talked about the intangible, like the ideas, the concepts, the advice, right? Which does have a value, but you're actually giving them something that they could pay a company, a recruitment company or a company to build the market map.
And it does take us some work. We are putting time into this, and we pay for the tools that we need to generate that insight and that kind of stuff. So there is a cost to it. It's just, if you think about that cost of acquiring the customer, we build that into that. So it's part of our kind of marketing budget, if you like.
Okay, so we're coming full circle here, Tom, because earlier you said something interesting, which is that when we both started in recruitment, companies were paying the recruitment agency fee for sourcing and access to talent. And now you're actually giving that away for free because you've realized it's not so much the data, it's getting a clear enough message to those candidates that they actually take an interest and they respond, right? And so you're providing something, there is a value for sure, but then the likelihood is the client's going to go, oh, wow, you already know all who we need to reach out to. But then they're like thinking through, oh, so what are we going to do with it next? Either like, and you can make a very compelling argument that, look, you could take that and you could reach
100%.
out to them and see what happens. Or if you want to shortcut this process, we have a system for packaging your story and then presenting it in the most compelling way.
Yes.
And making sure there's an orchestrated campaign that goes to these candidates that's going to maximize the chance that they actually do respond and take an interest in your business. So which way do you want to go?
Yeah. And it's, this is how long it's going to take. This is who we've done it for. These are sort of our close rates and all this kind of stuff. You're only going to have to see 5 candidates rather than 25. All this kind of stuff. It's all quantified, right? And it's absolutely, especially in the market as it is today. Specifically thinking about biotech, actually finding candidates is really easy because there's a lot of candidates that are out of work and some good candidates are out of work. But that creates different problems, right? It's then you've got 200 applicants and when are you going to go through them? And so, I think constantly we're having to shift, well, what is actually the problem in the market? Because it was a few years ago that like there was so much demand for talent that everyone was getting 4 or 5 offers every time they went onto the market. So it was all about close rates and attraction and all that kind of stuff. Now it's about getting the very best people, getting them through the process, saving you time on the screening, making sure you're getting the right people. We do a lot around like people being culturally aligned as well and how we define that. So yeah, but you've got to quantify all of that. And, we've refined the pitch around it and all that kind of thing. And so it's, it's just about continually looking for, well, what are the problems that are actually being experienced by our clients and how do we directly solve those problems? Not just, we have this thing that we do and we kind of can explain how we do it, but we can't really. And just like,
okay, this is really interesting, Tom. So, how have you been so successful at really pinpointing the client problems that are most like the biggest pain points for your customers? I think most recruiters could have a pretty educated guess, right? If they're specialists in there and they've been doing it for a while, they could probably have a kind of educated guess. But do you have a methodology for really making sure that this is the biggest challenge that our clients need help with right now? And then we can design whatever the offering is around that.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. to get to where we've got to now in what we're offering and the pain points we're solving, we've tried out a lot. Like, this has taken years of failed initiatives and poorly performing campaigns and all that kind of stuff. But I think the first thing is being really clear on who those clients are. So we know there's kind of 4 groups that we target. They're all in biotech companies of a certain size. And we target the CEO and COO at smaller companies. And at larger companies, it's then the line managers and the HR people. And they've all got different challenges. Some of them overlap, but they've all got different ones, right? So we have those like personas really clear, and we know what they're about and all that kind of thing. And then we look at, okay, so what are the pain points that they're experiencing? Not really worrying about whether we can solve them or not at this point, but like, what are the things that we think those people are experiencing? And this isn't just an internally generated thing. You know, we're constantly going out and talking to our clients about like what's going on and what's on your mind, and if we could be doing other stuff for you, what other stuff would you like us to do? And most of it we don't do, right? Most of it isn't very insightful, but every now and again you get something that that really strikes a chord. And then I think just being really resistant to any laziness in any of the messaging. Like I do weekly reviews of like the team's outreach campaigns and what they're focusing on and what the conversion's like and all that kind of stuff.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
So you're personally looking at it and reviewing it.
Yeah. Partly because I think it's really hard. Like, I've got a really great team, but I'm the only one in that team that's the CEO of a company. So I'm the only one who has a perception. They know because they work with CEOs, but I'm the only one who like personally has an experience of like, as someone who runs a company, these are the things that I care about and these are the things I don't care about. And I think what a lot of people try and do, and this isn't just a recruitment thing, they try and reverse engineer the problem to the thing they want to sell.
Yes. Okay.
Rather than going, what are the actual problems these people are facing? And then how can we help to solve those problems? And you don't always have to change your product, although sometimes you do a little bit.
Ah, interesting.
But really think about the problems in isolation, I think, is really key.
I love this, by the way. In our coaching business, I run every what day is it? Wednesday, I run a copy critique clinic where people send in their campaigns and their messaging, and I review it for them. One of the most common mistakes I see is like when I ask recruiters and even business owners, what's the biggest problem your client is trying to solve? What's keeping them awake at night? What's their daily inner monologue like in their head? What are the things they're like that are stressing them out? And they're like, they can't find the right talent quick enough. I'm like, really? Are you sure? Because it sounds like, when you've got a hammer, everything looks like a nail. It sounds like you're defaulting to the talent specific problems, but let's go higher level, bigger picture. You're CEO. What are the key things that you're the key objectives that you're responsible for achieving? And what are the key issues that you're dealing with? What are the threats and the challenge? Like, think higher level. Talent might be one of them, but it's not going to be articulated the way you're speaking, like an HR or recruiter type person. That may resonate if you're reaching out to a head of talent or an HR manager, but that's below the notice of the CEO. They don't think of the problem in those terms. You need to think higher order problems.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that's also a mistake I see as well, is that people will target the CEO or the COO of a company and go, oh, hey, these scientists that you're recruiting, we can help with that. It's like, I'm not even involved. I didn't even know that was happening.
Right. Yeah.
So yeah, real understanding. And I think, so some of our team are transitioning into a client-facing role at the moment from a delivery role. And one of the things I've been talking to them about is like, yes, we as a company have all these different groups of people that we target, these kind of broadly 4 different groups of people that we target. But I don't want you to worry about that. I want you to pick one. And I want you to talk to as many of them as you can at our existing clients. I want you to try sending out different types of emails about the things you think might be on their mind. I want you to find out for that group of people what is on their mind, what are their pain points, what are the things that they care about. And then once you've figured that out, then you can add another one.
I love this, Tom. This is so good because we have a 9-step client acquisition accelerator roadmap. Step 1 is identify your ideal client avatar. And because another mistake I see people making is they're sending the same email to the CEO, the CTO, the HR manager, and the whatever else. They're all getting the same message, which makes no sense because they, as you said, the problems may overlap, but they have different perspectives, different needs, different, challenges. You can't just, it's lazy. You mentioned the word lazy earlier. It's lazy to try and just send a generic message to all of those people. It's not going to work unless you get super lucky. Let's just take one persona at a time. You don't even need, like, yes, maybe there are 4 or 5 or 6 different personas that you sell to, but let's just start with one. And you mentioned getting your delivery people talking to as many of those types personas as possible. So look, you can use AI. We have a GPT to help build personas, but it's not a substitute for, we call them avatar interviews, talking to that exact type profile of person and asking them really, big questions and recording that call, ideally, recording it and getting those transcripts. That insight is gold.
Yeah. They'll tell you how to sell to them if you ask them the right questions. And then you don't need to sell to them in that conversation, right?
Exactly.
But you can just go back. You can also then go back to those people later and go, oh, hey, you know that thing you talked about? Yeah, I fixed it. So do you want to buy this thing that's fixed it?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
And I did this before starting Singular, actually. I spoke to, I didn't know people in drug discovery. I knew people in the industry, but not in that part of the industry. So I just got in touch with loads of them. And I said, look, I'm thinking about starting this division, this business. I'd really like to understand what you're experiencing in the market and, what the problems you're facing are and, see if there's any things that I might be able to help with. Not now, because we haven't started it yet, but just in the future, as we design this, I want to design the right solution. So can you help? And a lot of this was cold outreach. And obviously a lot of people ignored it. But I probably spoke to 50 to 100 people who would have been in the right market over a course of 4 or 5 months.
That's awesome, Tom.
And then obviously when I started the business, those were the first 50 to 100 people that I went back and spoke to and said, hey, I've done the thing that I talked about. Do you want to have a chat?
Absolutely. I get another stroke of genius. I interviewed a lady called Somer Hackley, who runs a boutique exec search firm. And she talks about the art of selling without selling. And I think this is an example of that where, like, don't be in a rush to pitch, but, ask for advice, ask for help, ask for, a conversation or feedback on something that you're considering or, get that, because people are much more willing to help you if there's not going to be a pitch attached to it. And it just lowers their defenses. The drawbridge comes down. They let you into the castle. You have that conversation. You can sell to them later.
But you've got to genuinely not pitch to them as well. That's the hardest thing for a lot of people. But I think, the thing, something I've realized after a couple of years of running this business is that actually your idea of what the solution should be is probably wrong until you have those conversations. So I joined an accelerator probably about a year into the business, actually. So it was a bit sooner than I thought. But joined an accelerator, and it was for general businesses. And I kind of realized, okay, well, we've done a lot of good stuff around the story we tell and our narrative and our brand and things like that. And that's quite different and fresh. But in terms of our business, there's no innovation there. So I was like, okay, well, how could we innovate? And what I came up with was a sort of job advertising and screening product. So I was like, okay, well, don't pay for us to do the whole thing. But what we'll do is we'll write the adverts for you. We'll post them. We will screen incoming applicants. And we'll put the right ones in front of you. We don't make any guarantees, but we'll charge you, I can't even remember how much it was. I think it was £1,000 a job or something like that. Now, I didn't just launch that. I went to people that I knew at that point and I said, look, I'm thinking about doing this thing. What do you think? And the feedback that I got was that it was completely the wrong idea. And that advertising product that would have been £1,000 a pop turned into what we now call our talent partnerships, which is essentially embedded like RPO Lite solutions where we do everything. But from £1,000 ago, the biggest partnerships that we have on that are like 250 grand. Because that was the problem that people wanted solving. They kept saying to me, no, I don't want you to do this little bit and then hand it back to me. I want you to do the whole thing. And I just want to be able to trust you to do the whole thing. And I will pay you if you take it off my plate.
Wow.
And so that completely shifted that solution. And that's been a big part of our business model since then. So you just don't know. You can it's always a hypothesis until you get people actually saying, oh yeah, I'd actually really like that. And you don't have to keep selling the same thing that you've always sold.
What a concept. Absolutely. Yeah, innovation. This industry is not very innovative overall, right? People like the basic model hasn't changed for 100 years, probably. We've added tech to it. So we've added LinkedIn, we've added automation tools and so on. But the basic service is pretty much the same. So absolutely. I love the way you're thinking around this, Tom. Listen, this has been super fun. We could keep talking for another hour, but I'll let you get back to running your business and really, really fun conversation. I've learned a lot and I'm sure listeners have too. So thanks, Tom.
No, it's been great. Can I say one more thing before we finish?
Yeah, go for it.
The other thing I think is really important is just people wildly underestimate how much volume they need to do.
Say more.
Both in terms of outreach and advertising. I think the volume of outreach you have to do to convert now is much higher than it used to be because there's so much more noise. And as I sort of alluded to earlier, with advertising and content and things like that, you need to do way more than you think you do to actually get a result. And, thinking about that lifetime value thing, my sort of perception was, oh yeah, but I've spent $2,000 on adverts and I haven't had anything from it. It's not working. But actually, when I worked it out, I probably wasn't likely to get anything from it until I'd spent 5 or 6 when I worked out all the numbers. And so you've got to do way more than you think you have. Just because you've contacted 200 people and no one's taken you up on your offer of a meeting for 15 minutes for a coffee doesn't mean that doesn't work. Maybe it does mean you need to tweak it. But until you've done 1,000, you don't really know if it's working or not.
Right. I totally agree. This comes back to our podcasting conversation earlier, right? Like, don't do 5 episodes and tell me it doesn't work, right? Like, do 100, and if you still have had 0 business benefit from it, then okay, I'll. But I know if you get to 100, you will have had massive benefit. Things like we ask people to do personalized Loom videos as part of their outreach, and sometimes people say, "Oh, I tried that; it didn't work." Okay, how many did you do? I did 10 videos. I'm like, okay, well, it's quite a small sample size to decide if this is effective or not.
When I first learned to sell retainers, we had retainer training at S3, and we were fully contingency business. We'd never really done retainers in that part of the business, and basically everyone decided it didn't work. And I wasn't the first one to win a retainer, but I started winning retainers really consistently, and it ended up like 30-40% of my business was retained, which was unheard of in that business. Now, by the way, at Singular, all of our business is retained. We don't do any contingency work. But the difference was I didn't win a retainer till the 47th time I pitched it. Because I kept track of it. After 4 or 5, I was like, I'm going to see how many it takes.
Okay.
Everyone else did it twice, and when it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So my first 15, 20 of them were rubbish anyway. There was no chance I was going to win them. Tom, so that sort of stuff applies too.
We have so much in common. I worked for a contingency firm. It was an independent. It was called Melville Craig in Scotland. They were acquired by S3, not S3. Sorry, that's you. They were acquired by what was it called at the time? TMP, who are now Huxley. Not Huxley. I keep throwing out these S3 terms. Hudson.
Hudson. Yes.
They were acquired by Hudson. So, but I was so fed up and sick of contingency and getting messed around by clients and having the rug pulled out from underneath you. I was like, I'm going to figure out how to get paid up front. And I was totally rubbish at it at the beginning. And my colleagues would just try it a couple of times and then be like, no, I'll just do what I know how to do. And I was like, no, I am figuring this out. There is like, I'm not going back. I'm going to burn the boats. And I did get to about 40% retained, but the first few were terrible.
Yeah, of course. It's always going to be terrible, right? Because you're so nervous about it and you've never done it before. And So I just think people don't do stuff enough to expect it to convert. And I think that's a common trap.
I love it. Tom, thanks for sharing that extra pearl of wisdom, which 100% that lands for me. So yeah, listen, have an awesome weekend. Thank you so much for doing this, and let's keep in touch.
100%. Cheers, Mark.
All right, take care. I really enjoyed this conversation with Tom Froggatt. I hope you did too. Tom shared some brilliant and very practical ideas you can apply straight away. Number 1, replace hustle with systems. Do you have a repeatable process for generating clients? Or are you still relying on bursts of activity when things get quiet? Start documenting what actually works, then turn it into a system that you can run every week. Number 2, know your numbers. What's your lifetime customer value? When you know exactly what a client is worth, you can decide how much you're willing to spend in both time and money to win the next one. That's how you can scale with confidence. And third, lead with value. What could you offer for free that would genuinely help your ideal clients right now? Tom created his Hiring Edge Insight Report. And so that simple, data-driven resource opens doors for him. Think about what you could give away that builds trust and demonstrates your expertise. Which of these ideas resonates most with you? What's one thing that you'll implement this week? If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you're subscribed so you'll never miss another episode, because there's plenty more like this coming up.